Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Deborah Peters Show. My name is Deborah Peters, and I'm so grateful and appreciative that you have joined us today. I also am grateful that you have subscribed and comment and liked all of my podcast videos that come out. This is really, truly something, it's the love of my life, to be able to get this level of information out to the masses, in the sense that it's really designed to raise your consciousness and to give you more awareness of what's possible in your life, so that first of all, you don't feel like a victim, and then secondly, you feel like you have some power over your life and you're capable of creating the environments that you want to thrive in, from health to wealth, relationships, self-expression, and of course, your business. So that's the whole purpose here. And, my goal is really to take you out there on the leading edge of thought, to give you information that is not necessarily mainstream, perhaps is controversial at times, to get you to just kind of shake loose those old programs and patterns and that conditioning that we get through our lifetime and through society and through media that says that we need someone outside of us to fix us. And if you really look back at scripture and the way life began in this planet, there's nothing further from the truth. Everything comes from within. And when you get that awareness, then you can find the right professionals to embellish. And I mean embellish on that, not replace that. So today is one of those amazing guests, and I'm thrilled about this conversation because you know how obsessed I am with health and being able to take responsibility for your health and again, get into touch with your body, actually learn how your body functions so that you can understand what's happening within it and what your contribution is to good health, bad health, low health, changing health, including aging. So today I have the most esteemed Dr. Sueldo, who we have been working really hard to get this episode scheduled just due to conflicts and schedules. And what's fascinating to me about this whole thing is, like everything else that takes place that you're working toward, it's happening at the absolute perfect moment, because she has relocated her practice from Central California. She escaped, and much like I did. And she is opening her practice in Fort Lauderdale on Monday, September 25th. So Dr. Sueldo, thank you so much for joining me today.
Deborah, thank you so much for having me. I know it's crazy how life works like that. I mean, this has been months in the making, and we finally made it happen. And here I am opening doors on Monday. So thank you so much.
It's so cool. It's so cool. And so today we're going to dig into fertility. And, like we were kind of chatting before the show began, my heart goes out to people that really want to conceive and have a family and struggle with it. And that's your expertise. You're double board certified, which is, I can't imagine the amount of study that went into that. And your fertility center really deals with empowering your patients, getting them in touch with their body, know your body, dig deeper, and not just accept a limited diagnosis from a physician that tells you, forget it, it's not going to happen, you're stuck. So I think what I want to know is, what spiked this in you to
Yeah.
not just the fertility path, but the approach you take to fertility?
Yeah. So it's a long, windy journey. I will start with my father as a fertility specialist. So I was exposed to this early on, but that said, was very much, going through schooling. I didn't want to be in his shadow. I wanted to pave my own way. and almost steered clear of fertility intentionally because of that.
Right.
And as I was going through, I really was drawn to women's health, specifically OBGYN, because of the women's empowerment piece. I realized how disinformed or uninformed even the most educated women were about their reproductive health. And
Yeah.
so I arrived at the conclusion, okay, I'll do OBGYN, but I'm going to stay there. I'm not going to go, I'm not going to subspecialize. And, as you get older, I was in my first year of OBGYN residency training and was exposed to the IVF lab and, really the cutting edge things that were occurring on an everyday basis. It's still such a young field. Studies are coming out that are continuing to change practice. And so you really have to be on your toes. You have to stay in the know. And that was very exciting and appealing to me. And for those who don't know, REI, which is reproductive endocrinology and infertility, as a subspecialty is extremely competitive. The year I applied, there was only 38 open positions across the entire country.
Wow.
So yeah, it's extremely competitive. So did 3 more years after my OB-GYN training and became a fertility specialist. And as you said in the beginning, double board certified. I worked really hard for that title. There was a lot of time and sacrifice that went in. So proud to carry that flag. And once I finished all my training, I was now a practicing physician. And the more years I was in practice, I've been out almost a decade now, the more I realized that this had to be a multi-pronged approach. Mm-hmm. I knew that patients needed medical treatment. We know that infertility is a medical disease. The World Health Organization back in April published a worldwide study. 1 in 6 people worldwide will be impacted by fertility. So it is a real problem that requires medical treatment. But that couldn't be the only thing, because in my counseling, what I found was that talking to patients about lifestyle optimization, I would regularly see patients who maybe had a weight problem. Maybe they're working night shift. Maybe their caffeine consumption is, through the roof. Maybe they're not sleeping. I mean, there were so many aspects that are known risk factors for infertility. And many of the patients that I see, by the time they get to my office as a specialist, they've been trying for 2, 3, 5 years sometimes. And so had they started, optimizing their lifestyle at the very beginning of their journey, yes, they may have still needed fertility treatment, but at least that aspect of treatment would already have been optimized. And so they would have been coming into the process sort of better set up for success.
Well, that's fascinating because, I'm from a layman's perspective, I'm obviously not a physician, but I do have a love affair with positive lifestyle, nutrition, fitness. I owned a gym for 10 years. I trained professional athletes. Then I transitioned into mindset programming and training and human engineering and performance, mind performance coaching. And I feel like there's these elements that upset the body's natural process to function the way it's designed. And, there's nutrition, which to me, we have an obesity epidemic in this country, and it comes from the food supply. Everything is sprayed. If you're not buying from a local independent small farmer rancher, you have zero control over where and what's happened to it before you get it. There's all these fake seed oils that are masquerading as vegetable oils that cause inflammation in the body, maybe inflation too. And the list goes on and on and on. We're overcarbed. Then we're under exercise, the sedentary lifestyle, the hours behind a computer screen, and all of these sort of negative factors, as well as as time has progressed through the decades, our mindset, I feel, has been bombarded with fear programming. And so, for instance, I was watching this series on, I think it was Stars or some platform, and it was called Daisy Jones and the Six, and it was a band. Did you see it?
No, I haven't seen it, but I have.
Oh my God, it's so much fun. And it's basically the story of Fleetwood Mac and Stevie Nicks. And what was interesting to me, besides the cool 70s fashion, was and the music, the musicianship, was that everybody was slim. And so I thought, I'm going to just go online and I'm going to research, what people looked like in the 70s. And it was mostly people that were naturally lean and slim. And I contributed that to the food supply. Then, you leapfrog forward and we have the opposite today. So, and then there's the mindset, where people feel powerless, out of control with their lives. We experienced that in 2020. They feel victimized. They feel like there's this thing outside of them that is coming to get them and do them in and take over their lives. How much of those two concepts weighs in on what you do with your clients, with your patients?
Absolutely. So I think there's just a couple facts I want to share with the audience to sort of support.
Yeah.
There's a physician friend of mine also in South Florida who is very interested in culinary medicine. She's an academic clinician. A lot of her research is around food and what we eat.
Did you say culinary medicine?
Correct. Culinary medicine.
I love that.
Yes.
Okay.
And she gave me two stats that just blew my mind. And the first one is that the average American diet, 60% of the foods we eat are ultra processed. So they have additives, they have gelatins, they have all different kind of artificial things incorporated into 60% of the foods that we eat, which to me was like, what? So that was wild. Scary. And then the second stat is that, for example, even if you buy a peach, because people think, well, fruits and vegetables. So that peach today has less nutrients than a peach back from the 1950s. And they think it's because of how farming has evolved to meet the food supply, et cetera. So because the nutrients come from soil, and therefore the nutrients, the fruit and vegetables are not supplying us with as many nutrients as they used to. And again, that was mind-blowing to me, because it's not just about eating clean, but really supplements have almost become a necessary part of our diet because of the lack of nutrients, even in those natural foods. So that, to me, those two things were just wild. And then as far as the obesity epidemic, yes, that actually is well known. That's been stated by the CDC. In this country, at least a third of American adults are considered obese or overweight. So it's definitely a problem. And unfortunately, we do see that translate into reproductive health. And I always tell patients that reproductive health is simply an extension of general health. And so, yes, there is underlying disease, but if you are obese, or if you consume alcohol in, significant quantities, or if you are a night shift worker whose metabolism is completely altered, all of those things are going to impact your reproductive health in the long term. And so when I talk to patients about treatment, I call it the three-armed approach or three-pronged approach. So we're talking about the medical treatment, which would be what they're doing with me and the treatment of their infertility. But we're also talking about sort of the lifestyle optimization, which I mentioned earlier, and then the integrative practices. And that's really kind of an umbrella term that I use to talk about things like meditation. You were talking about mindset programming earlier. We talk about acupuncture. We talk about regular movement of the body, whether that's yoga, whether that's walking, but just, regular movement of the body, and then potentially supplements as well that may be necessary. And so really, it's about what can I discuss with the patient? How can I counsel them to optimize all of these aspects that are then going to set them up for the best success with treatment?
Yeah, that's fantastic, because that empowers them,
Right.
and it gives them back control over their lives. If you're unable to conceive and you want to conceive, then you feel like your life is out of control.
Right.
So that's brilliant. And you work with both men and women.
I do. I work with both men and women. I always say there's many different ways to form a family. So, most people would think of the traditional heterosexual male-female couple, but I also work with single parents. I work with same-sex couples. So it's really about how can we help this person in their family building journey, whatever that family construct might look like. And to your point, we were talking about this before the recording started. Probably the number one thing, there's a lot of feelings and emotions that come associated with infertility: shame,
Sure.
guilt, anger, embarrassment. But probably the most constant is that feeling of lack of control. Even if I'm healthy, even if I'm working out 5 times a week, even if I'm tracking ovulation with 3 different methods and whatnot, it's still not happening. It's extremely disempowering. And that lack of control contributes to the increased risk of anxiety and depression that we see in infertility patients. And so when you talk about lifestyle, when you talk about integrative practices, not only are you trying to optimize that patient's chances for success with the fertility treatment, but it's also a way of them gaining back some of that control.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's where the mindset, if you're feeling out of control and you're stressed, now you've got your adrenals ramped up and you've got hormones going wonky. And we hear this all the time, where a couple is trying to conceive and it doesn't work. And then they finally sort of acquiesce to the idea of adoption. They adopt, and boom, there's a pregnancy. Yeah. So it's got to be influenced, because our mind and our thoughts and our emotions are really chemical compounds that actually upset the functionality, the healthy functionality of the mitochondria of the cells.
For sure. And, I always tell patients it's hard to quantify, right? It's hard to make stress an objective marker. But we do know, particularly in the post-COVID era, that people across the world are experiencing, higher levels. And I always tell people it's not an acute sort of emergency type situation stress, right? It's not like, let's see, what could it be? Like, some mega event in your life, like a car accident or something.
Right. Death or something.
Right. When we talk about this stress level, what we're talking about is kind of this chronic, just sort of simmering, low burn that people are experiencing in their day-to-day lives. And that level is higher than it's ever been at any other point in human history.
Sure.
And absolutely, that's going to impact your health.
Yeah. I mean, people were programmed and conditioned by massive fear. And, once that gets in, like when you're trying to create a new habit in your life, the notion is it takes somewhere between 3, 7, and 21 repetitions. And then you have a new habit, you have a new way of thinking, you have a new way of relating, you have a new emotional response to your environment. And so, during that time, we were, like, I don't even know how to word it. We were bombarded with messages of fear and loss. And as a humanity, what's more powerful than bringing an entire planet to its knees in submission is programming them to be afraid of X, Y, Z. So unraveling that and reprogramming that and unconditioning that, that's no small feat, because this has been going on for a long time.
Sure.
And then, I'm sure you probably know the statistics. I have no idea, but the fertility rate has been declining. Do you have anything on that, statistically speaking?
Yeah. So what we know is that in today's modern world, and this tends to be more true for developed countries, but appears to be true across the board, is that the younger generations are having less children. And so in certain
Sure.
countries, what that means is they're not going to be able to replace the population. Now, separate from that, we talk about rates of infertility. And we do believe that we're either A, recognizing it more, or B, that the frequency is going up. Because back even just a few years ago, pre-COVID, we were quoting patients 1 in 8, that infertility affected 1 in 8. Now in
Okay.
April, CDC said the WHO said 1 in 6. And if you actually look at CDC data, the data shows here in the US, it's probably closer to 1 in 5. And so we see that, again, we're either diagnosing it more or it's becoming more common. One reason for that can be the concept of ovarian aging. So as women, we have this biological
Sure.
clock, and we're waiting longer to start our families. And so when
Yeah.
a woman comes over 35, she's considered advanced maternal age, we do begin to see increased risk for infertility in that patient population. But even in those women, oh, my mom had me at 42, my grandma was pregnant at 47, et cetera, et cetera. So even in those women, we know that, we were talking about those chronic sort of low burn stress levels earlier. Additionally, we post-industrial revolution, we are
Yeah.
exposed to more environmental toxins now than at any other point in human
Yeah.
history. And so what may have been true for grandma or for mother may not be true for today's female patient.
Absolutely, because it's the game has changed. And so the first step, I guess, then you do with them is have them make some lifestyle adjustments where they're more informed and empowered about the fact that they actually can change this. And then do you guide them in the changes to make and staying consistent so that they learn these new patterns of living their lives?
Right. So I think there's sort of two things here, right? And so always when they're seeing me, there's going to be a medical component. So are we,
Yeah.
is there a fertility evaluation indicated? Do we need to look at, uterus, tubes, ovaries, and sperm, et cetera? So that'll be one part of it. And then the second part is going to be what changes need to occur to optimize our chances for treatment. And so we'll sort of take inventory of that. Now, as a fertility specialist, the focus is always going to be on the fertility treatment piece. But that said, I do believe that the lifestyle changes are so important that I do actually have a separate program within my clinic for lifestyle optimization. And so, for example, maybe somebody, is smoking, they're trying to quit. Maybe they just need a weekly check-in for their blood pressure or their weight, or just that touch point with the healthcare system that is going to empower them to continue on their journey. So I've had experience with that. With weight loss, classically, we've always told patients, eat less, move more. We now are beginning to have a different understanding of chronic obesity and how the hormones in chronic obesity are altered so that even in that patient who's eating less and moving more is not going to experience the same kind of weight loss that somebody who's had a recent weight gain problem. And so now, with the advent of the group of GLP-1 agonists, and so for the audience, they may recognize them as Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro. It's a whole family of medications. It really has sort of changed how we focus or how we treat and manage patients with chronic obesity. Now, the medicines are not a quick fix. Bariatric surgery is not a quick fix. I have a colleague who talks about not just the biological aspects of weight gain, but also the psychological and the social. So she talks about an approach, biopsychosocial approach to the treatment of obesity. And so you want to make sure you're addressing all of those things. And we do have that incorporated into our clinic as well.
That's fascinating. One thing I can testify to in regards to making dietary and lifestyle changes is, one, when you change your eating patterns, I'm a big fan of intermittent fasting to give the body a break. And two, when you change what you eat, where you buy it, and in what quantity, then it gives your body a rest from having to constantly process something that's not even real food. And what's magical about it, I think, we were talking before we jumped on with the live, is I always had a weight problem all my life, which I figured it out. But it took a lot of desire and curiosity and dedication to figure out the answers. And when I got there, I made an immediate shift and went from, the old school eating several times a day, meals, snacks, to intermittent fasting. I had to work my way up because my body was screaming at me for food. And I had a sugar addiction. So, and I drank alcohol. So, my weight used to run around like 180, and nobody knew that because I work out a lot. I used to own a gym. I'm fit, I have a lot of muscle tone, and I could conceal it, but I knew,
Sure.
my clothes were a really tight, at most times, size 12. And then when I made this adjustment, which isn't that long ago, I got off the yo-yo dieting thing, trying this thing and that thing, and just dedicated myself to intermittent fasting and really healthy keto, which includes a lot of cruciferous vegetables. Within a very short period of time, faster than I could have imagined, I dropped down to 156, and then I dropped down to 146. So that's a size 7, basically, for me. And it changed my thinking. It all the brain fog left, all the confusion about, should I do this? Should I go here? How should I run my life? All the pain in my joints that made it really hard to recover from a workout, because I cut out our traditional standard American diet. And it took weeks where I was like, is this thing ever going to kick in, And then one day I just went to get dressed and my clothes fell off me.
Right.
So that changed. And then that had this massively positive impact on my emotional state and my repetitive thought patterns. I mean, I can't even tell you, like, it's so immense. It's almost immeasurable. So I just feel like the number one thing that everyone should do, whether you have fertility issues or not, is really learn to understand your body.
Sure.
Really get in touch with, well, how does my body really function? And because one of the things that would happen to me when I ate sugar and consumed sugar or went out drinking at night is the next day my neck would be out. Like that my body, my liver couldn't process it. Sure. And, toward the latter part of me finally making this final decision to absolutely never drink again, it would wake me up in the middle of the night because my body couldn't process the sugar that was in the alcohol. And I had a lot of sleep deprivation, which leads to a negative mindset. You know what they say about going out and getting drunk? It's like, it's a self-induced depressive state the next day. Yeah. So
I wanted to touch on, oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, jump in. I think
I want to touch on, I think, a key thing that you said, and I think where clinicians have a lot of work to do. And it was that initial decision that you're like, I'm not doing this anymore. Right. And then it wasn't an overnight thing. It took weeks. And then once you actually saw the change, that's where, the positive reinforcement happened, right?
So empowered.
But I think so many people struggle to get to that initial, okay, I'm not doing this anymore, number one.
That's hard.
And then that second hurdle of, okay, this is not going to be magical, right? Like I'm going to make these
Yeah.
changes, but it's going to take time. And I think those are two really key benchmarks that in your journey that we can extrapolate as clinicians where we can intervene. And I think
Yeah.
especially, and you can maybe attest to this, is, there's so much fat shaming in the healthcare industry.
I know.
And when you come to a clinician, well, you need to lose weight, but there's no guidance, there's no recourse. It's just go and come back in 6 months when you're lighter or whatever. In the fertility space,
Yeah.
that was not an uncommon thing to say to patients. Take 3 months, come back, and then we'll start treatment or something like that. And I think that is really a disservice to somebody
100%.
who may not have the tools. I mean, you were in the fitness space, you had
And I
access
was still
to a
overweight.
lot of information, and you still had to really learn to navigate, right, your own journey. And so I think as clinicians, and again, it's in my world, it's something that I do separate from the fertility treatment. It's all contained within SABO, but it is a different program because people need the tools, they need the guidance, and they need the understanding and compassion to be able to make the changes, not see any change, right? And then continue with that journey until they start to see the results. And so I thought it was really important to touch on that because
No, it's good.
because you had the willpower and the determination to stick with it. But I think for most, and I include myself, for most people, that is not the case. Most people, they need the hand holding, they need the guidance, they need sort of the direction in terms of where are we going with this plan.
And yes, and well, you did a great job of unpacking that. Thank you. And it's not like I hadn't sought methodologies that would help me, but they were fads, and they were, one day the message is you can consume this, and the next day you can't, and it's just all over the bloody map. But what happened during that journey is, as my hormones started to change, I went to a gynecologist, just regular checkup, and I had a complaint about my weight. Like I at that point, I was like, I was done, I just didn't know how or where to go with my doneness. Yeah. And she said, well, it's just the nature of, how women's bodies change as they age, and you're just going to have to accept it. And I'm sitting there, and it's like all these alarms are going off in my mind. And suddenly I realized I'm sitting across the desk from a woman who's obese, and she's the physician. So clearly I needed to be more circumspect in terms of where I got my information. And so I just, I got rid of all the shakes, all the protein powders, like all the stuff that does not come from Mother Nature, that my body had no idea how to process. And then I needed to create a new self-image, because I was so conditioned from years of my body being like a yo-yo because of the yo-yo diets, that I had to actually develop a new self-image. And when I did that, and this stuff all sounds really simple because it is, but it's so not easy.
I have a mentor who says it's the simple things that are the hardest to do.
Yeah, it's 100% true. And I think, it's just like, I was writing in my journal one day, and I was saying to myself, when I'm on stage giving a speech or teaching a training, I want people to look at me and see someone that's 100% congruent with what she's saying and teaching.
Sure.
And I wasn't congruent because my body was unhealthy. And that's a good point to make, is that, one should get their weight in check to not to get healthy, but quite frankly, the reverse. Get healthy and your body will release the fat. And that also includes your psychosis, like who conditioned you to not love yourself. And I've discovered that most people that are obese, me included, when I was, is that it's trauma emotional trauma and mental trauma caught up in the cells.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to do that work along with the other changes in order for it to stay off the body. And
Yep.
it's no small adventure at
Yep.
all.
Yep. No, I concur.
It's
concur.
funny, isn't it? It's like, so we've got a few minutes left. We've got about 10 minutes left. Do you have some sort of tips that people can use at different stages? Like first, to make the decision, because decisions are really powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And then second, to be invested enough in the outcome to keep going. And then third, to love themselves along the journey.
I love that. So, okay, so let's start with the first question. And I think we spent a lot of time talking about lifestyle and the integrative practices. So I'm not going to speak to those as much now, only because we spent so much time earlier. And, you know, the classic teaching, when to see a specialist. If a woman is under the age of 35, she's been having unprotected intercourse for a year, it's time to see someone and get tested. If that woman is over 35 and she's been having unprotected intercourse for 6 months, then it's time to see someone. But there's definitely some exceptions to that rule. So for example, if a woman has irregular cycles, she's not able to predict ovulation, that's someone you don't want to wait. You want to get in as quickly as possible because we want to determine if there's an ovulation problem. The other thing, are there risk factors in your history or your partner's history that might contribute to your infertility? So for example, a classic one would be a history of STDs in the past. STDs, we know, can impact the fallopian tubes, many times not causing any symptoms. And so you would have really no way of knowing unless you actually did testing. Another one could be childhood surgeries, where the development of scar tissue could impact the pelvic organs. And then lastly, of course, if there's any, cancer requiring radiation or chemotherapy. And then I always like to put sort of an asterisk at the end and say, even if you don't meet any of these criteria, if you are anxious about your fertility, I encourage you to seek out a consultation with a fertility specialist, because many times either just the potentially doing testing and finding that everything is normal is enough to give you that peace of mind to continue on your journey. So in a nutshell, encapsulated, that's my 1-minute version of when it's time to see a specialist. In terms of, going into treatment, the number one thing I want the message to be is this is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. And I think, I applaud Hollywood and celebrities for making infertility and IVF a dinner table conversation. They've really normalized a lot of the aspects around infertility that were previously really taboo. And so I'm very grateful for that. But like all things Hollywood, a lot of times there's almost a glamorizing or a simplifying of what the treatment actually entails and how successful the treatments can actually be. And so anyone going into fertility treatment, regardless of the type of treatment you're doing, you need to understand that there's no kind of slam dunk, do this and you'll be pregnant. It really is a marathon. And in fact, there's a great organization, Resolve. They're a nonprofit organization working with the infertility community. They surveyed their membership and found that the average patient who did IVF, which is the most advanced treatment option, required between 2 and 3 embryo transfers before they actually had a live birth. And so just, again, it's a marathon, not a sprint. You want to prepare yourself that this is going to be a journey. And so you really want to get into that mindset versus like, okay, let's just do what we need to do. I want to be pregnant and we're just going to do one cycle and it's all going to work. You really want to sort of change that mentality. As far as sticking with the journey, I am very proactive about stress management. It's been well documented that with every negative pregnancy test, with every period that comes on, there is grief trauma that compounds month over month. And if you're not digesting that, if you're not processing that, if you're just kind of going through the motions and trying to get it done, that's going to accumulate over time. And what we know from the reproductive psychology literature is outside of the financial barrier, so eliminating that aspect, the number one reason that patients stop treatment is burnout. It's the emotional toll that treatment takes on them or on their relationship. And they ultimately stop treatment. And many times they stop that treatment too soon. If they had just stuck with it maybe a little bit longer, then it would have been successful. And then the third thing, how to love yourself in the journey. So I think that very much ties into the proactive management of infertility, whether that is, therapy, couples therapy, online group support, Facebook groups, maybe a confidant, family or friend who you trust to sort of be your sounding board during the journey. And I think just acknowledging that infertility is a medical diagnosis. If you have lupus, if you have, cancer, if you didn't do something to cause that, right? And those require medical treatment. Infertility is the same. This is not your fault. This is nothing that you did. You have a medical diagnosis that requires treatment. And there has to be joy in the moment. There's a great TED Talk by a good friend of mine, Gail Miller, and she talks about the power of and it's finding joy during the grief, right? And so really sort of trying to find those glimmers or those bright spots as you're going through the journey. Taking pauses as necessary. For some patients, they've been in treatment for 6 months, 12 months, a year and a half, 2 years. And so their entire lives have been around this journey. And sometimes it's like, maybe we need a break. Maybe we need to reconnect with myself, reconnect with my partner,
relax a bit.
Right. And reconnect with the things that I find joy in, whether that's travel or whether that's your work or whatever it may be. And then lastly, I would just say, the relationship with the doctor, or specifically the fertility specialist in this case, is huge because, patients can do treatment after treatment after treatment. And at what point is enough enough? Or at what point do we introduce things, third-party options? So things like egg donation or gestational surrogacy or adoption. And there's so many variables that go into that decision that go beyond medical knowledge. And so really the relationship with your doctor is just so vital for that journey that I encourage you to find someone that you're truly comfortable with. And whether that's me, I'm not the right fit for everybody, or whether that's but really finding that doctor that you connect with, that you trust, that will listen to you, and that will help you navigate this journey that many times, always is not an easy one, but many times is a very complex one. And so really taking into consideration all those variables.
Oh, that's fantastic. Great way of just like looking at each one of those segments. I do want to digress for a second and just comment on cancer. So, radiation and chemotherapy are not the only treatment for cancer. It can be healed naturally. And it's actually an archaic concept when you look at, 1,700 people die every day in America that are because they have cancer, or is it because of the way they're treated? It's that we've been doing it a long time, and we shouldn't be having 1,700 people a day die. So I really encourage people to really do your research and understand what's happening with your mitochondria respiration if you have cancer, and find an integrative physician that can really work with you on healing it naturally.
And I would just
be willing to do the work.
Yeah. And I would just add, I think that's where the relationship with your doctor, it stands out, because it really is about, 1, understanding your diagnosis, 2, understanding your options, and then 3, understanding what the alternatives might be. And the same is true in the fertility journey, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's, I think the common denominator of this is really like getting to know you and what your body needs and what it's not getting, and what it's getting that it shouldn't be having, and just like that whole sort of like list, but thank you so much for being here today. What's your website URL?
Absolutely. So patients can find me if you're in the Fort Lauderdale area. You can see me in person. I am licensed in both Florida and California, and that's going to be www.sabofertilitycenter.com. So if you're looking at that tagline under my name, it's just that altogether.com.
That's awesome. And this has really been a very robust conversation, and I really appreciate you for coming on. And I know you have a free download for folks, and we'll put the link in the description on all the platforms. So tell us about that download.
Perfect. So, I really wanted to come up with something that wasn't fluff. I really wanted to come up with something that people could use, they could incorporate. And so I came up with the PDF for 5 ways to optimize your natural fertility. And it's really about what can you do from day one so that potentially down the line, a year and a half in, if you do need to see a fertility specialist, you've already checked all these boxes. And so they can find that on your channels, and you guys will share that information.
So it's kind of like a preventative guide. Yeah, that helps you set
It's
yourself
really
up.
about, correct. So like, what is within my power to optimize within my lifestyle to set myself up for success? And if that success happens before the patient ever gets to me, great. I love those stories.
Yeah.
But if you do end up meeting me, then you've already sort of checked off that piece. We don't need to tweak anything. You've been doing that already. And so it really sets the patient up for better success should they go on to need treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Sueldo. I appreciate you being here today. And remember, everybody, to get over to my website, which is neimind.com. And you can find 2 leadership and management retreats that are on the calendar for the remainder of 2023. One is in Georgia, and the other one's on the West Coast in Newport Beach. You can get registered for those. I still have a few seats left. And if you're the leader of a company, feel free to book a strategy session and we'll get you all set up for 2024. So thank you so much for being here, everybody. I really appreciate you. And remember, stay aligned, stay alert, and stay awake.